Alrighty, everyone, welcome back. First things first, if you're listening to this as a podcast, that's all fine and dandy. But we do air these on YouTube as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, hey, you're looking good today. Thanks for joining us. So, thank you for tuning in to the newest episode. And without further ado, I need to introduce the fountain of truth, Jeffrey Can. Thank you, Jeffrey. Welcome back to the show.
Always great to make an appearance on the show. Thanks so much.
Of course. And as you know by this point, this is no standalone podcast. It's for, don't have my copy of Bits, Bytes, and Barrels because actually I was reading it last night. It's still on my nightstand. It's nice to record these, get that supplemental information, and really build off of it with the book. And for $10, you can't go wrong yourself. We'll definitely give you some links at the end of the show. So that's enough with the introductions. For now, let's get into the topic today. Autonomous technology. Now, we did do an episode on AI. Jeffrey, what is the difference between these two?
Well, the way to think about autonomous technologies is think about that as drones and robots. So it's equipment that operates or can carry out a series of tasks largely in a way that is does not require direct hands-on human supervision.
Alrighty, and then do you have some examples that might help illustrate those differences between, say, AI and autonomous that people may be familiar with?
Oh, sure. I mean, the easiest one to think about it in a autonomous technology would be an aerial drone. Flies around by itself. In many cases, the second by second requirement of a drone to deal with things like slight differences in say the wind activity while it's flying. The drone has the capabilities on board to adapt and adjust to that by itself. Doesn't require a human to be able to need to do that. On the other side, though, if you want to send the drone in a specific direction, consumer drones, like what we all are used to in kind of our consumer lives, we have to have a controller somewhere that's kind of steers the drone in the direction we wish to go. But in other applications, military applications and industrial applications, very often these drones can navigate their own way in the real world and do not need a human driver, if you like, at the controls all of the time. And that's how autonomous technologies are unfolding in our industrial landscape. Think about them as robots that you'd see in an auto plant, assembling vehicles, except autonomous technologies these days are just much more sophisticated.
Yeah, so clearly one of those advantages is that you need less human oversight. Are there other advantages that we can mention? And on the other side of the coin, disadvantages?
Well, the main advantages to autonomous tools and technologies are the ability to send them into places that are hard for humans to survive in. So deep underwater, high up in the atmosphere, or in dangerous settings such as inside a tank that has presence of noxious vapors, or maybe poor ventilation, or is dark. We go through enormous energy and elaborate activities to ready people to actually go into these settings so that they can be safe. Whereas with autonomous technologies, many of those precautions are unnecessary because you're not securing for oxygen supply, various hazards, and so autonomous tools can often go in places humans really can't easily go. That doesn't mean that they always should go, but there are many applications now where robot technology is superior to humans. Now, where humans are still required or need is where the robot is going to be encountering either novel situations for which it is inadequately prepared, or situations where what the robot is expected to encounter is going to be novel or requires some kind of human judgment to be able to get the robot to carry out the task at hand.
And so clearly lots of examples, but what about oil and gas specifically? Is this something that's still pretty young? Because the further we get into this series, the less mature these technologies are going to be. How long has it been used in oil and gas?
I'm not sure I could actually say when the first robot was used in oil and gas, but a quick survey of the literature would suggest that oil and gas companies have been early adopters of robots in specific instances, and in even some cases developers of robots. Some of the early examples would be robots that would crawl around on the inside of a petroleum tank, place where you would have, stored crude oil or gasoline during a turnaround or a maintenance cycle. And the robot is used to inspect the interior of the tank, looking for corrosion and cracks and degradation in material integrity. And that is a task that you could use humans for, but the tanks, given that they stored petroleum, are very, very dangerous. And so oil and gas companies have been working on robots to solve for this problem for quite some time, years, in fact. But for the most part, if you look at the day-to-day of oil and gas as we presently see it, that's everywhere in the supply chain. Doesn't matter where you're at, midstream, downstream, maintenance and repair, construction, capital. Robots are relatively novel. You don't see very many of them yet.
Yeah, of course. I mean, definitely it makes sense that you're trying to keep people out of these toxic and dangerous and potentially deadly situations with the use of robots. But what about,
Absolutely.
say, a remote function? Are we reaching a point where we could, say, direct autonomous technology from onshore and direct the technology on an offshore setting?
Yeah, we're very, very close to that. We certainly are already there in aeronautic applications, so drones that fly around and inspect a facility from the air. That can be done without on an offshore setting, for example. Subsea drones, so doing work on the subsea of the ocean. That technology is already in use and being rapidly developed. So there's at least those two applications.
Mm-hmm.
Where we typically don't see that yet is where the mechanical maintenance activity and the supervision of a specific asset at a facility presently has the requirement for someone to walk to that location, climbing up and down stairs, through narrow passageways, inspecting and investigating the integrity of that equipment. That is still very much a human function. I would say, though, that we should not underestimate the speed by which these technologies are evolving. There are companies now trialing robots that are surprisingly human-like in their ability to execute what humans currently do.
Mm-hmm. And then clearly safety, huge aspect where it can be improved on.
Huge.
But what about everyday routine, mundane, common tasks? We're always looking to make our own lives easier and read a little bit less of an Excel spreadsheet. Can we do that today, or does it even move past that?
Well, we're definitely there today. I mean, the development of what we call robotic process automation tools, or RPA tools, dates back probably 15 years. If you went back to 2000, early 2000s, there was a wave of change that went through the major oil and gas companies shortly after deploying SAP to cope with Y2K related challenges, where these enterprise tools allowed large organizations to lift and shift whole functions out of a whole variety of business units and drop them into dedicated facilities, and then locate those facilities in jurisdictions that were advantageous, either because the labor cost was low or the telecommunications availability was high. And we call that call centers today, right? When you call just about anybody,
Yeah.
where are you really phoning? Like, do you think you're phoning Alabama? Probably not. You might be might be in Manila, for all you know. So oil and gas companies lifted and shifted their HR functions and supply chain and all kinds of other functions, overhead functions, into these call centers, and then discovered that applying, think about it as Excel on steroids, macros on steroids. They could automate all kinds of functionality that was taking place in those facilities. That technology has not really been deployed into oil and gas beyond these call center type locations. But in the last 18 months to 2 years, the interest in this has gone way up as oil and gas companies have been exploring all possible ways to take cost out of the business. And these robotic tools are a fast and easy lever that you could deploy because the technology is 15 years old and has been de-risked. And those are robots. They're just executing a process in a robotic fashion.
Yeah, I like that interest is actually growing because clearly everyone can benefit from this. But right now, what is the lifespan? Are we looking at something long enough? Because it has to be long enough for people to use it. Because if they have to implement a new iteration in such a short time span, well, then you can forget about it, right?
Well, the robot technologies are evolving as many of these technologies are on Moore's Law, which means they are every 18 months or so, they are either doubling in capacity or capability, or they are falling in cost, or their power consumption is falling, or their capabilities are just getting better and better. The ability now to buy a drone from a Walmart that 3 years ago would have cost you $1,000, you can now buy online for 100. I mean, it's this sort of cost curve is like that, and so the lifespan of these technologies is short. There's no doubt about it. The challenge for oil and gas companies, of course, is the way the industry is set up and structured and the way it runs, which is a waterfall way of adapting, evolving change, is inconsistent with the speed by which these things are evolving. And so I might turn your question around, or turn the question around, which is, are these technologies evolving too fast for oil and gas to adopt them? Another way to look at it is oil and gas really too slow to cope with the fact that the world is speeding up? And the real challenge here is, how do we speed up the pace of change in oil and gas? Not do we just simply say, well, I don't want to deal with these technologies because they evolve too quickly.
Yeah, definitely a lazy mindset, if you ask me. But in terms of production specifically, clearly safety we've talked about, but are there any other producing assets that can benefit from this?
Well, there's lots of good examples out there. There's two technologies I often use as examples to kind of articulate this issue. One is a company called Ambient. That's AMBYINT, Ambient Technologies. Ambient has developed a controller which behaves like a robot. If you stare out at oil and gas fields, you'll see what's called a beam pump. It looks like also called a rocking horse, but it's a mechanical contraption which is lifting oil product to the surface through its mechanical motion. And Ambient sells a controller that straps onto that pump, and it optimizes the performance of that pump every single stroke. It makes a decision every stroke. How much pressure do I go down? How much pressure do I exercise lifting up? And it turns this mechanical pump into effectively a robot. It operates autonomously. It decides at the site how fast or how slow it should go. Yep. And you can program it in response to price of electricity, for instance, or the price of hydrocarbons. Or typically, it is, what is the volume of oil or gas I'm lifting up and how much water is present? Am I lifting up more water than oil? Maybe I should slow the thing down. Suddenly I've got a spurt of oil. Okay, start lifting faster. The machine optimizes at that level. That's one kind of robot. Another one is a technology called Kelvin, which is, the temperature Kelvin, Kelvin. And Kelvin has been deployed by British BP in some oil fields in the United States. Kelvin is an artificial intelligence engine that turns the mechanical apparatus of running the oil field into one large robot. It provides the brains to allow the pumps to run at just the right level, to deal with the bottlenecks that happen because your tanks get full, or the gathering lines are full, or you have to do some maintenance in one part of the field. So what do you do with the rest of the field? So Kelvin optimizes all of that play for the whole of the oil field, which is turns the field effectively into one gigantic robot.
And that's great, because I cannot tell you how many times for class we had to look in production at artificial lift curves and see, oh, how can we improve this pump? Now that's a useless skill. By the time I get to that point, there will be a robot doing it. But we'll talk more about job replacement and job security later. I'm curious right now to know what infrastructure needs to exist. When we talked about the Internet of Things, you said we always needed electricity and a network. Is it the same for this, or is it site dependent? Could we maybe get away with just electricity to power a robot?
Well, you still need power, and power has to come from somewhere, and that does not change. And so power is still a requirement. Communications is a bit less of a critical driver. It's still important, but it's less of a critical driver, because by virtue of a robot being autonomous, that is to say, it operates on its own, from time to time it can be disconnected from a network and continue to operate. And in fact, there are examples where, again, back to ambient, where the network is sporadic. Imagine your facility is way off the grid. There's no, there's no telecommunications network. What can you do? Well, you could connect to the occasional satellite that passes overhead. But those satellites might only be overhead for 15 minutes a day. And so imagine a scenario where your kit, your gear at that well site is operating as it should. And then during that 15 minutes, it's uploading all the data from the past 24 hours, downloading any software updates. Maybe it's for a beam pump, it's a new curve. You're downloading that. You're downloading the lessons from all of the other similar pumps. Any patches for security or cyber issues, any operating system upgrades, all get downloaded in that little window. So do you need the network? Yes. Does it have to be pervasive and there all the time? No.
No. And can that be done in 15 minutes, say, when that satellite's overhead? Or are we looking at a rate of technology increase that is, well, accumulating enough data that we are outpacing the use of satellite, or are satellites improving too?
No, it's all of these technologies are improving, and yeah. So back to that question: is the 15-minute window enough? It's enough. It's enough, and so that's not really seen as a critical block or barrier to the deployment of that technology out in the field. The bigger block is the fact that it is running for 23 and a half hours, where the supervisory level can't see it because it's not on the network, and that creates some angst with asset managers who, the model is you always have eyes on. Things never really run fully autonomously. And so what's happening is managers are getting over that concern because the reliability of the equipment is getting better, and the ability for that gear to run uninterrupted reliably is just getting better and better all the time.
All right. And then we've definitely considered production side of things. How can that benefit? But of course, there's supporting field services. How are those people looking to benefit in the future, or are they doing it right now by using this autonomous technology?
Well, there are all kinds of companies now that who, for dint of their service model, have embraced automation tools into the service model. So a good example of that is security and protection services now use aerial drones to fly the perimeters to see what's happening at the perimeter level of a facility. Drones to go up and do stack inspections or inspections from the air to see whether stacks need to be repaired or damaged, painted, these sorts of things. So the drones are the service. There's a whole service industry that specializes in this whole area. If you go to an oil and gas trade show these days, well, under a pandemic, probably not, but I can tell you in February, if you went to an oil and gas trade show of substance, there would always be a handful of drone operators who were there offering subsea and aerial drone technology for oil and gas. What you didn't see was the kind of drones yet to do things like, there's a great video on YouTube you can check out about Boston Dynamics, which is a robot company. They have a quadruped robot which serves as a tool companion to a field worker. You can dispatch the robot to go collect tools for you, and it can go up and down stairs and open doors, and all of this it kind of serves as a companion to the worker. That kind of technology is still pretty novel in the industry.
No, I'd love to see that too, because those robots are hardy. I've seen them abuse those son of a guns pretty bad, and they take it and they still keep going.
Yeah, they have to be robust. I mean, that's going to be one of the requirements in the environment, is that those robots have to be pretty secure.
Definitely. And then in the past, in this series, we've talked about a few technologies that might pair really well with automated technology. I mean, between AI combined with automated technology and industrial Internet of Things and cloud computing, which of those three areas looks to benefit the most, or are they all do they hold wild potential?
Well, in fact, most autonomous technologies or robots will already be a combination of some sort of set of sensors. So if you think about an aerial drone, it has to know its altitude and its speed and its pitch. It has to have sensors to detect wind speed and air pressure and the temperature. And so it already has sensors on it. In order for the sensors, the drone to take into account the ability to maneuver in that real world. It has to take the data that the sensors are giving it and interpret it somehow, and then make a call. Okay, do I accelerate? Do I speed up? How do I navigate? That requires some kind of artificial intelligence to interpret all of that data and process it. So a robot actually already encapsulates a bit of data, sensor technology, artificial intelligence, and of course, the mechanical apparatus to take all of that data and apply it and do real things like dip, go left, go right, go up, go down. And so the think of an autonomous technology that does not have that is not plausible in my mind. It's all part of the package. The thing is that those technologies themselves are all evolving independently on their own, and it's autonomous technologies that bring them together to create a robotic solution.
Yeah, and the more episodes we record, the more I see that line is blurred, and you can't really have one without the other. They all make use of each other. And
yes, and as I think about it, the way to think about a robot is it is the collection of these things, and then it carries out real work. But the underlying building blocks, data, sensor technologies, interpretation technologies, cloud computing, networks, all have to also exist in for your robot to have a measure of productive success in your environment. You can't have one without the other.
mm-hmm. And if I'm a venture capitalist. I'm looking to drop some money into a new sector, new business. You know, I love my hypotheticals. Let's say I want to get into automated technologies. Would a good place to start be maybe somewhere in the realm of midstream, I'm thinking? I imagine it'd be pretty easy to take advantage of robots versus people to deliver a lot of these refined chemicals or even just stock crude.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, the business case for adoption of these technologies does vary by sector and what drives your business. And so in the case of companies that are doing a turnaround, and midstream companies are all go through some sort of turnaround cycle or maintenance cycle somewhere in the run of a year or every other year. The application of robots to some of the work of the turnaround is a very fast and easy to justify use case. And so you don't have to go too far to see the potential of using a drone to send a camera and eyes up onto your field so that you can inspect it from the air. So very, 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 very useful service. Mm-hmm. The replacement of people in various other roles, construction equipment, trucks, forklifts, many of these things are already proven in other domains and have yet to come into oil and gas. And so the early adopters will be looking at how do I use the autonomous technologies in transportation services of some kind. But you'd be out on the edge if you're doing that, because that technology is still not yet in wide use. So there's a fair risk profile associated with that.
So definitely a young technology, but let's say 5-10 years down the road,
upcoming.
A network like this, that's going to grow virally, right? If you don't need someone to sit and read a gauge and push buttons, what do we do for, say, the truckers in areas where 40%, 50% of their economy is dependent on moving a lot of these materials when you've replaced all of that job function with a truck? As sensors, cloud computing does all of the thing a human can do for less.
Yeah, this is a major social challenge we're going to have to address. And I do not have all the answers or even some of the answers for that. The glib argument is, oh, well, my truck driver will go off and become a coder. I don't see that. There is a job to be done to maintain these technologies as they get rolled out, but I don't see that as the job of the individual who's driving for a living. Mm-hmm. So even that, it's a bit of a stretch to visualize with ease how these different kinds of jobs are going to be displaced, and then what's going to happen to the humans who are working in those jobs. But the signposts are very, very clear. There's a number of heavy trucking companies already running driverless trucking pilots throughout the United States to try and figure this out, because the prize is huge. It's enormous. And but what hasn't equally, what I'm watching is the public sector side, which should have some concern about the human resources. is not keeping pace with these technologies and how they are going to disrupt society.
And I know you're not an anthropologist by trade, so sorry for that left field curveball. But even so,
I get asked all the time, what is your answer for the human talent problem? And I don't have an answer. Like it's we just have to be smart about this and be thinking about it, because as I like to say, we have 30-year-old technology. It's been running oil and gas for 3 decades. We also have employees who've been part and parcel of that operation for 30 years. And so when you start making changes to one, you have to be thinking about, well, how am I dealing with the other? Like, what is my response going to be? And simply firing people isn't socially acceptable. So there has to be some kind of balance here that both companies, society, governments come to grips with to deal with the arrival of this technology.
Yeah, definitely tough from a people side of things, but maybe you have a better answer about the data side of things. Once we start implementing these networks at a viral rate, I imagine there's going to be digital boatloads of data that we have to sort through. So how does an organization even begin to manage, say, a single field with a field full of ambient pump units?
Yeah, and this underscores probably one of the key issues with digital. It's not as simple as I buy this technology, drop it into my operations, and suddenly everything is great. It doesn't work that way. And that's the reason why oil and gas companies in particular, if you think about the upstream, have to embrace these tools not as single standalone things, but as part of a system, part of an integrated system. And to your exact question, how are you going to deal with the flood of data that comes out of the sensor sets? How are you going to provide for security over the robots? You can imagine if your security provisions aren't up to industrial grade, what happens when some hacker takes over your robot? Like, do you really want to be in that position? Today, a hacker breaks into your computerization back office and takes a bunch of customer addresses. You're going to really hear about it in the press, and your stock is going to take a beating. What's going to happen when some 16-year-old in a basement hacks into your mechanical robot and starts, doing running havoc with it? The companies have to think about this stuff, and that's why I say it's not just about I do this one thing and everything's going to be great. You have to look at it as a system.
Yeah, definitely lots of planning required in advance, but is that something that's scaring companies right now? They don't want to be the first person who gets made an example of when something does go wrong?
Well, I think in the case of robots, there is now enough track record for certain classes of robots that the risk is now being certainly not eliminated completely, because that's just not practical, but has been mitigated significantly. And those robots we've already touched on. Back office robot process automation is one. The use of subsea submersible drone technology going underwater to inspect and make repair facilities is two. Three is the aeronautic variety, the flying around kind. A fourth kind of technology that I would highlight is the autonomous haulers. So these are the heavy-duty dump trucks, the kind that carry, deliver 400 tons of material that you see in mine sites. That technology has already come to the oil and gas mines in North America and Canada. So the big mines, they are already, several of them, like 3 for sure, already have shifted out of the human driver version of heavy hauler and are now being run by effectively remote controlled, robot operated haulers that are managed by a control room in another city. And so there's no driver at the wheel for that technology. So that's a kind of robotic tool that is already in place and it happens to be driving, just doing it in a mine site.
Yeah, definitely. So plenty of use cases, but also lots of planning required. How can management make sure that once everything's planned, they're ready to move, they're ready to mobilize, how do you deliver this to the employees that are going to be working with it? Because if I'm a production engineer and you come into my office and go, all right, we have ambient technology now, we are not going to really need you to do 80% of what you did before, I'm going to feel threatened.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and so having the right communication message is indeed the right way to think about it. Is what how do I communicate the story? The analogy, or the way I would think about it with those employees might go something along these lines. 80% of our production typically comes from just 20% of our wells. Pareto's law. What that also means is that 20% of our production is coming from 80% of our wells. And that 80% of our wells does not get nearly enough human attention to run them to their optimal level. And so these robotic tools are going to help us move the performance of all of those wells up to where they are at least all operating at the higher than average level for that platform of wells that we had before. So you're lifting the worst performers up at least to the average as best as you can with these tools. What this does is it frees up the humans who normally would have been running around trying desperately to keep the 80% running, allows them to concentrate now on moving the whole average up for everybody. And that actually creates more jobs and more demand for human horsepower to supervise those wells at that higher performance curve. That should be very appealing to employees. I see that as not you're going to, quote, lose your job. Rather, I'm going to remove from your day-to-day the nonsense and noise of the lowest common denominator of our performing wells, and free up your time so that you can help move the whole thing up and improve the performance of everything. Who wouldn't be interested in that as a solution? Like that's where I think that it's all in how you frame the narrative and explain to people where you're going with this technology and what is going to be the reason for the employees to get excited about it. And I think it has to be a story about growth, about better jobs, about less drudgery and less routine, more greater use of the inherent human capabilities of creativity, teamwork, leadership, problem solving, judgment, all that sort of fun stuff. And that's much more energizing than, oh, your job is to dump data into a spreadsheet for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible to train people to be accepting of this change. You just got to be sensitive to it, and maybe you should
Yeah,
look to get
exactly.
into politics. You might be good at it.